It's 10 minutes to 4. The patient in front of you is sicker than the visit type said she was. You need another set of eyes and you need it in the next few minutes. You don't need it tomorrow morning, you need it now. So you call the number that they gave you during your orientation. It rings, it goes to voicemail, and you stand in that hallway doing the arithmetic that you should never have to do. How much of this acuity can I carry by myself? And what happens if I'm wrong? And who's actually going to help me out of this? Nobody wrote that moment into your job description, but it was decided long before you got there. Someone decided how many providers were going to be in the building all at once. Somebody decided who was going to be reachable and how fast. Somebody decided what population you would see and what would get added to your day later on. All of those decisions were already made, were already final while you were sitting there in the interview asking about PTO and company culture. I'm Candace Elam. I'm a family nurse practitioner and I work full-time in primary care. I precept and I do this work every week. This is part 7 of the job behind the offer, and this one is about the part of your job that touches your license. There are 2 things in your job that both get called scope, and keeping them apart is most of the work in this video. The first is your scope of practice. That's your license and your certification. That's what the state says that you can do. The board decides on it. It doesn't move because a job description says it moves. The second is your scope of duties, and that's what the employer is allowed to ask you to do. A contract decides that one, and unlike the first, it can be written wide open. Here's why that distinction matters. The second one can walk straight into the first one. If you're a nurse practitioner, say you're a family nurse practitioner like me, your certification covers primary care across the lifespan in an outpatient setting. It does not become an inpatient certification because somebody who scheduled you put you on an inpatient unit. It doesn't become an aesthetic certification because somebody offered to train you on some machine over a weekend. It does not stretch to cover the service line that the practice added 10 months from now because some grant came through. When it does stretch, the exposure isn't shared evenly. The practice has an entity behind it. It's got legal counsel, it's got insurance, it's got a rough idea of what it can absorb. You have a license with your name on it, and that license is the only thing in this whole arrangement that follows you. It follows you to your next job. It follows you to the board of nursing. The employer's name stays on the building, but if you lose your license, you lose your livelihood. Here's what to actually find out. 4 things, none of them are in any offer letter that I've ever seen. The population and the acuity. The title says primary care, but that doesn't tell you who's actually on the schedule. A panel is a design decision that somebody made, and acuity is part of that design. Find out who you're actually going to see because primary care covers everything from a well child visit to a patient who probably should get admitted to the hospital but refuses to go. What can get added later? And this is the one that I would watch the closest. Weight loss, hormones, infusions, injections, aesthetics, a program that arrived with grant money and they needed somebody to staff it. Very often these things are not in the room when you're being hired. They show up 5 months later and they're justified by that clause that says other duties as assigned. Almost every contract in this profession has that phrase, other duties as assigned. So don't treat the presence of it as the problem. The question is whether anything limits it. Tied to the position, tied to your training, tied to your scope of practice, tied to your hours, that's fine. Floating free with nothing attached. It's a line that gets the job to turn into something that you never agreed to. And of course, there's that money mechanism that's sitting underneath what I want to name clearly, because that's the reason why this happens silently instead of out loud. Primary care nurse practitioners are almost always exempt salaried employees, which means that the salary covers the role no matter how many hours the role turns out to take. There's no overtime that starts for you at hour 41. So when a duty gets added, nothing in the payroll system adjusts. It's not going to be a line item or an expense that lands on the desk of somebody upstairs. So you've got a bigger role with a salary that stayed exactly where it was from the first day of your job. As my mother says, the favor you do today becomes your job description tomorrow. And she's never been wrong about that. The next thing is who's actually supervising and collaborating, like not just the name on the form. I'm talking about the human being, talking about the difference between a medical director who is in the building and a medical director who is virtual, off-site, partially retired, living in another state. A monthly review of 10% of your charts, it's a compliance activity. That's all it is. It's not someone standing next to you at 3:50 on a Thursday afternoon when you need a second opinion in the next 4 minutes to determine whether you're sending this patient to the hospital. Both of these things get called supervision, and they're not remotely the same thing. How often would you be the only medical provider in the building? Asking it as a plain, matter-of-fact question because it is a plain fact. Some days that's fine, but as a standing arrangement for a brand new MP, that's not okay. And this one, especially in those cash pay wellness franchise settings where the named medical director might be somewhere that you physically are not, a medical director who will never stand beside you is not a supervision plan. And one thing before I keep going, because it applies to everything I just listed, everything I'm describing gets answered out loud in an interview. And that out loud answer in the interview is not a term of your job. What governs your job is the document that's signed by both parties. It's the contract. So I put together a checklist called Get It in Writing. It's the list of what should be on the paper before you sign so that the job you accept is the job that shows up on your first day of work. It's free and the link is in the description. The other part of this, which is something that they never put in a job posting, backup is a resource. It's not a personality trait of the practice. It's not how nice everyone is. It's not the company culture. It's a resource. The same way an exam room is a resource, either exists or it doesn't exist. So here's what a real one looks like. A name, a channel, a response time that you could say out loud. So when they say, oh, someone's always available, that's not a name. When they say, oh, just text me, that's not a channel. And when they say, we're a family here, that's not a response time. I want to be really careful here because the version that's missing almost always arrives wrapped in warmth. That's what makes it so hard to catch in that interview room. Nobody sitting across from you says, we've got no backup, you'll be on your own. They say, we're really collaborative here, and they mean it. And that still doesn't answer the question. Same thing with orientation. Orientation is not a courtesy that the practice extends to you. It's how you learn the system, the staff, the referral pathways, the population before you're carrying all four all at once. A real orientation has a length, it has milestones, it has a specific person who is responsible for you by name. 2 weeks and a full panel is not orientation. It's just a start date with a grace period attached to it. And a ramp. Your volume climbing on a defined timeline instead of landing on you all in week 1. Speed in primary care is a skill that builds with repetitions. Handed a panel, a full panel immediately doesn't get you faster. It gets you behind. And you learn the entire job in a state of permanent catch-up. And that quietly becomes your definition of normal. New graduates are the most exposed here. Usually they're the last to know it. As a student, you were shielded from most of the weight of this job. So the gap between being a student and being licensed is far wider than it looks when you're in school. Passing boards means that you met the standard to practice safely. That is real and you earned it, but it doesn't mean that you were ready to run a full panel alone on day 1 with a phone number for backup. And that's not a knock on you or on your program. Transition to practice is an actual thing with actual evidence behind it. And the job that's built for it are the ones where new nurse practitioners get good instead of getting scared off. So what does the good version of this look like when you find it? It's specific and it's on paper. The population and the acuity are named and they match what you're certified for. If there's a service line that you'd be expected to staff, it's named now in the interview. It's not assigned to you 10 months from now. And backup is a person with a clear means whereby you can reach them, and a time frame for when you can expect a response. Someone should be able to describe it to you in a sentence without mollifying you and saying that we're like a family here. Orientation has a length and has somebody who is responsible for delivering it. And there's a timeline that somebody wrote down. And there's language about duties and your positioning, your training and your scope and your hours. And all of those are in writing. None of that is a wish list. These are the conditions that let a person practice safely, and a job either has them or does not. They're not favors that a generous employer grants to candidates who ask nicely. They were built in, or they weren't, before you ever walked into that door. Requiring them is not you being difficult. It's you reading the job accurately. Here's where I'd leave this. A good NP in a job with no backup is still a good NP. She just has no backup. Your skill does not fill a staffing gap. It never has, and it never will. And the moment you start believing it can is the moment that that gap becomes invisible and permanent, and it endangers your license. Everything I've named today is findable before you sign. That's the whole point. All of this is decided in advance, which means that all of this is knowable in advance, which means that you can walk out of that interview having found out all of this. And when you get an offer and the scope of duties language and the supervision language and the coverage language all end up in one document, reading that document is its own skill. And that's what the offer and contract decision kit does. It helps you to walk through the terms of an NP employment agreement, what it actually contains, what each one does, and what to ask for before you sign. It's linked in the description. The licensure side of scope of practice, state rules, supervision models, and the aesthetics and wellness segment of it specifically, this has its own kit. It's being built right now. I'll tell you all about it when it's here. The next one is part 8, and it's about the paper. You did the work, you asked the questions, you got the answers, and then you got that 20-page agreement that shows up. And none of what you were told is in it. That one is called The Offer Is Not the Contract, and I'll see you in that next video.